Alright, I'm going to be installing a subwoofer in my 2017 Subaru BRZ, and I thought I'd make a video about it because I'm installing a bit of an unconventional subwoofer. This is a spare tire subwoofer. It sits down in the spare tire. You don't have to take out your spare tire, you can still maintain it. It's supposed to sit down in it. It's made by Pioneer. It's the TS-WX610A. For those of you that have a BRZ, you know that there's not a whole lot of room in these things, especially inside the cab. I looked into getting some subwoofers that go underneath the seats, but I don't think there's any that fit under the seats of this thing. There's very little room even behind the front seats to set a sub on the floor. Well, here, I'll show you. So here you can see what I mean about not being much room in the back seat. The back seat is a joke in these cars. No human with legs can sit back here. I have my driver's seat adjusted to where it's comfortable for me, and there's just a few inches behind the back seat, or between the back seat and the front seat. Like I said, there's no room that I could see under the seats to mount a under the seat sub. I think it would be very tight. Any that do fit are probably junk. I also thought about mounting an under the seat sub on this surface, but I was afraid that it just wasn't going to sound very good, and I thought I'd end up feeling it more than hearing it, so I just opted to do something in the trunk. So then I thought about sticking one of the under the seat subwoofers somewhere in the trunk, but I didn't want to take up any trunk space. There's limited cargo room in these cars anyway, and I didn't want anything in the way of being able to lay something in the back of the trunk. And the sides of the trunk, like any other car, the wheel wells are not flat, so it's hard to mount something flat to them. So I ended up picking this because when this is done, you shouldn't be able to tell it's even in the car. The problem with these is I cannot find anywhere you can buy these in the United States. These are all overseas. I had to get this off of eBay, and it came from Berlin. I forget how long it took to get here. It wasn't too bad for overseas shipping, really. It was ballpark at just under 300 bucks, including shipping. They're not too bad. It's supposed to be 200 watts RMS. I'll put a link down in the description, all the specs to it and stuff. And then this is the subwoofer itself. As you can see, it's very unconventional, very oddly shaped. Alright, this isn't bad. I think it's going to work. It's setting up slightly higher than the rest of the surface here, but maybe an 1/8 inch, I don't even think it's a 1/4 inch, so I think that should work just fine. If I have a slight hump in the middle, I can live with that. You'll see back here in the BRZ, you've got your jack, lug wrench and stuff, and here is the factory amp. It's set up very strange. The head unit powers the speakers that are in the dash and the tiny useless speakers in the back seat. This amp here powers the speakers in the doors, and this is what we will be tapping into to get signal to go to this subwoofer. Alright, I'll give you a look at what all comes with this kit. It comes with the subwoofer itself. You've got your main positive power lead with an inline fuse that'll run up front to the battery. Hopefully that's long enough. The main wiring harness, and this will take high level and low level inputs. And I will be using a converter to take the high level inputs from the factory amp, converting them to low level inputs. You'll use these RCA cables. Again, the wired controller for the sub itself gives you gain and the frequency, the cutoff frequency. There's a large, about a 1/2 inch thick foam pad. I believe this is to place in between the spare tire and the sub itself. I'm not sure if I'll be using this because I just did a test fit and it's almost perfectly flush level in there now, so I don't want to raise it any more than I have to. This is the same thing. I think this is actually for the top if you want to put a little bit of protection between the top of the subwoofer and the floor of your trunk before you lay it on there. I might actually use this in between the spare tire and sub. A couple of little odds and ends nuts and bolts here. I believe this is the other part of the wiring harness, depending on if you're using high or low level inputs. And then there is a extended threaded rod to use to replace the threaded rod that's in your factory setup to hold the spare tire. That way it's long enough to catch the subwoofer too. Hopefully this all works out. Okay, so what they've included here is this is your main wiring harness for the sub. Everything plugs in right here on the subwoofer, and there's a plate included that covers all this up. You've got your main wiring harness, and the wired control plugs in here. So what they've included is the main wiring harness. This will connect to the other yellow power wire running up to the battery. Here's your RCA inputs. It's got a long ground cable on it and a very long blue remote turn-on wire, which we'll be able to tap into the stock amp that's in the car. This is just to extend basically the RCA connections on here if you're going to run speaker level inputs. I think it's long like this because if you need to run all the way up to your factory deck, you could. I sure am glad these rear seats fold down, because otherwise I would have been doing all this in the trunk and fetal position. Anyway, I'll try to give you an idea what is going on here. So you've got your wiring harness that comes from the sub, comes over, splices into its power cable down the ground, and plugs in with RCA jacks to the high to low converter that I have that is spliced in to the factory harness to the factory amp. That's what took most of the time. You splice the 4 wires for the converter into the factory harness. And for ground, I used a bolt that was holding down the bracket for the factory sub. Now you want to make sure you clean that really well and get all the paint off of it so it makes a good contact. And then the control wire for the sub comes down, wraps here, runs through the center here, underneath some carpet, underneath the center console, up to the front center console. The yellow wire you see here is the supplied power cable that came with the amp. It runs along some factory wiring here and along the door molding on the passenger side up to the battery. Alright, so here's a bit closer look at what's going on. It's a bit of a mess right now. I need to tidy it up a bit more, but like I said, you have your 4 wires coming from your high to low pass converter, and they're spliced in to the factory harness wiring. And then I don't think you can see it, but under here is a stud for this bracket. That's the one I said I used for ground. I cleaned it up really well. There's ground for the converter itself, and there's ground for the sub. And for you that are wondering what the back seat of the BRZ is like, got the back seat folded down here, and the bottom part of the seat you can get out, almost out, with just one bolt, and then you can lift it up, which helped me run the control wire through here underneath this carpet and then out the back. I'm not sure how the back of this seat connects, but I didn't need to take it completely out of there to do that anyway. So that control wire runs up underneath the console. I didn't need to take it out. I just pulled it back some and tucked it underneath of there. And then the control harness itself, I will be using some 3M double-side tape, placing it right here. Alright, so here it is with everything put back in, your factory styrofoam spacing there. All my rat nest of wires kind of bundled up and zip tied there. Got the plate put on here, just 2 screws. It's nice that it keeps the wires pretty protected. The only thing that's kind of odd is the factory
flooring will lay over this, and it's going to lay on these wires a little bit, so I need to at least put something here to protect these later on. But other than that, all seems to fit in there nice. And it gives you a ton of options for your mounting. There's a few different threaded rods. There's some washers and spacers and nuts and things to adapt to whatever vehicle you have. I just opted for a metal washer and wing nut. I could get it in there tight with that. It seemed to fit. It was the right height. So here's the controller for the sub. I mounted it with some 3M tape stuck to the console there. I wish it was a little bit smaller, but it's tucked out of the way enough to where it shouldn't be too bad. It gives you controls for the gain or volume, the frequency that the sub cuts off, and your normal and reverse phase. Alright, well now I'll let you guys see what it sounds like. Now, with any video on YouTube, you're not going to be able to tell the actual quality of the sound, but hopefully this lets you at least hear the difference that it can make. I'll say that overall I am pleased with how it turned out and what it sounds like. Now, I should tell you, I wasn't looking for any super thumpy bass. I don't want to roll down the road and shake the cars next to me. I wasn't looking for that. I was looking for a more full sound to the stereo system. By the time you cranked up any kind of bass on the factory setup, it just got really muddy and I just could not get a full sound out of it. So this is just so I can kind of dial back the bass on the factory speakers and use the sub to fill it in and hopefully get a lot better sound. So what I'm going to show you is with the sub off, and then I'm going to turn it up a little bit and hopefully you can hear the difference. See tomorrow, the answer is alive. Everything you got to do. Yeah. Oh, sometimes you never fall. You're the lucky one. But oh, sometimes you want it. Alright, got all the install done now. Just need to put in the factory trunk flooring and pretty much done. I ended up being able to run the wires underneath the spare tire and pop back out. That way they're not on top of the spare tire. When I put the factory flooring down, they won't be laying on it. Overall, it turned out really good. My main thing is you can't even tell this is in the car once the factory flooring is in the trunk. It doesn't take up any of my trunk space, so that's the main thing. And for the money, it sounds decent. I could have gotten more sound for slightly more money, but again, I wasn't looking for anything to rattle the rearview mirror off the car. I just wanted something to fill it in and give it a much fuller sound, and it definitely does that. It definitely helps. Alright, so I hope that was helpful. Mainly made this video just because there's no information out there on this sub, and that's because it's all overseas. Like I said, I had to order this one from Berlin, but hopefully that helped out somebody looking for some options. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below.